Hey everyone, it's Ivan with KitBadger.com, out here today to share a pretty cool experience I had, heading back to Texas and meeting up with Sons of Liberty Gunworks. At SHOT Show 2022, I actually had the opportunity to meet up with the guys from Sons of Liberty Gunworks, and they were showing me kind of what was new, their new M89 Rail. Some pretty cool stuff going on with it, and conversation eventually turned to like, hey, do you want to come out to Texas and check out what we do? Maybe build a gun? And I'm like, that would be rad. I would love to do that. Personally, I really like the why behind things. One, actually seeing how things are built, like what differentiates one thing from another, but then also the why behind it. Because usually there's a pretty compelling story, unless it's just like, because we could, like certain products at SHOT Show, which may or maybe not should have been made, but they got made. But I digress. At any rate, from that, probably like 2 weeks to the day, flew out to Texas and met up with those guys and got started with one of their armors building a pretty rad gun. On a certain level, an AR-15 is an AR-15 is an AR-15. Yes, but. Like, yes, they all share kind of these commonalities, like parts compatibility, they all accept magazines, same triggers, trigger pin placement, all of those things. But kind of what differentiates things? One, I would say the quality of parts, as well as attention to detail and QC. It was really cool watching this gun come together and honestly getting the why behind some things that even if I intuitively knew, I'd never really articulated even just to myself. By way of example, there with the armor, putting this gun together, and he's explaining to me essentially kind of the go, no-go for magazine release, assembling the lower receiver, and explaining how basically, like, yeah, okay, you take the button, spring, magazine catch, you thread that thing on, like, boom, done, moving on. Like, yes, but like, why are we doing what we're doing, and what are we actually looking to achieve with that? And so yes, you obviously want to make sure it catches the magazine and releases the magazine. But if you look at like a forged low receiver, you essentially have these three ridges kind of around the magazine button. And the go, no go with respect to Sons of Liberty Gunworks and their guns they're putting out the door is basically making sure that that is basically just slightly recessed from the actual, those ridges going around there. So it ends up protecting it. And you're like, oh, of course. But, comma, like how many guns have you seen that that's not the case? Someone twirls that thing on, like, all right, cool, all right, good to go, moving on. Versus actually making sure it's to the right place so that you don't inadvertently end up releasing your magazine, which if you've ever run basically ambi-lower receivers that are not set up to be ambi-lower receivers and don't have that guard on the left-hand mag release, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. Guns laying against you, move around, go up, fire around, maybe the mag drop's free because accidentally depressed. Not fun. So yeah, something very simple that you can do to ultimately alleviate that. And that was kind of the process through building all of it out. Really, really, really strict attention to detail and knowing the why behind what they were doing and why they're doing it. Somewhere else this came into play was barrel nuts. So once that thing was getting cranked on there, cranked on to, I want to say 60 foot-pounds, Sharpie comes out, it's marked 60 foot-pounds. So if someone ends up maintaining this gun and for whatever reason the barrel needs to come off, it basically goes back on at the same torque value. And if you've ever done anything in shooting, especially once you get into precision shooting, you, I'm sure, know consistency, consistency, consistency. That's what it's all about. And so being able to know and maintain different values, which again, super important. You also saw this level of attention to detail bleed over almost to aesthetics. I say almost because definitely a purpose behind it. By way of example, driving in like a roll pin, for example. More often than not, it ends up kind of silver because you end up pounding on it and you push through essentially kind of the bluing or the coating that's on there. Well, right there on the workbench, permablue for both aluminum as well as like steel. So some of that comes out, something gets touched up, then some oil's put on it to initially protect it with the permablue stuff, and then secondly, protect it with the oil. And again, across everything, all of the roll pins, to include symmetry, making sure none of the roll pins push past further than they should. So basically they're all recessed from one side to the other in the firearm itself. Eventually making our way kind of to the crux of the gun, we have the barrel, gas block, everything else. Something I do think that is really cool about Sons of Liberty Gunworks is, yes, they get their barrels from Ballistic Advantage. Are they Ballistic Advantage barrels that you go buy? No, they're not. So just like FN makes barrels for a bunch of different OEM companies, that company, FN, or in this case Ballistic Advantage, is making them to a very certain spec. So the dimensions, barrel contour, all of these different things, to include actually gas port size, which is really, really important when you're actually firing a gun, because if you have something that's gassed incorrectly, you either have way overgassed to where, one, it's kind of unpleasant, early parts wear, and if you ever put a suppressor on it, it's just going to beat itself to death, or undergassed where you have honestly serious reliability issues with respect to being able to shoot that gun and have it function with pretty much any ammo out there. It was pretty cool seeing some of the nuanced differences in the new M89 Rail as well, which was getting installed on my 11.5-inch upper. I'll definitely bring you more on that later when I end up reviewing that gun. QC, quality control, very real thing. And before we actually started building my gun, ended up actually spending some time out on the range with boxes and boxes and boxes of bolt carrier groups. Here's what that looks like. Since Sons of the Liberty Gunworks obviously uses bolt carrier groups, they also sell them though. And part of their QC process for all the bolt carrier groups that come in, or even the ones that they assemble with some kind of upgraded parts, maybe touch on that later, basically they get test fired. So every single bolt carrier comes out, gets dropped in a gun, full auto lowers, magazine to 3 rounds, throw it in, all 3 rounds. Does it lock back as it should, like fully lock back on an empty magazine? If it does, cool, comes out, gets dropped back in the box. If it doesn't, if for whatever reason it kind of hangs up and doesn't go all the way back, usually indicative of something being wrong, then they'll test it with 1 more magazine. If it still doesn't, pulls out, gets marked with paint pen and set aside to either be diagnosed later and actually figured out, or honestly just scrapped because of that quality control. Wanting to know that things that ship through their doors are in fact perfect, as perfect as they can be. Things can always break, like it's a mechanical device. Everything over a long enough timeline will fail. But the level of quality control over what they have control over, definitely impressive. So follow that same bolt carrier group. Get done building out my upper receiver, and that bolt carrier group goes in it, gets thrown on the lower, taken into the little test fire range there in the facility.
Ready?
Couple more rounds. Did it work? Cool, awesome. Check that box. Again, 1 more step. But then, all said and done, it goes back over, goes on a rack. Now comes like official QC. You have someone else who did not build that gun, but another armorer who knows exactly what he's looking at and what he's looking for. Basically takes that gun and starts inspecting it, going through essentially a checklist of all these things like, hey, is this functioning properly? Was this done correctly? Going through, and you have essentially a bunch of people that are doing the exact same job, so they know what it should be coming out the other side. And I'm sure on a certain level, a little bit of a competition, like, oh, can I find something someone else missed? And go through. Then, as all those checklists are being fulfilled, take that thing back over again for a couple more rounds, test firing, knowing that, hey, this works when it leaves here. Again, super impressed with just that level of quality control, honestly. It was really cool across the board just seeing how Sons of Liberty Gunworks works, for lack of a better term, and all the different aspects to it, to include like their Cerakote booth. And it's neat that they do some kind of like collaboration custom guns, like one specifically for Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, as well as Chuck Pressburg. I believe they have a Steve Fisher gun as well. And yeah, just really cool guns made specifically for certain people that have them set up exactly how they want them. And then on top of that, all of their other guns that they have going through Sons of Liberty Gunworks. And overall, it's a pretty cool place. And it's interesting watching all of the different armors kind of working through essentially the same problem, coming up with the same results, just going about it, we'll say, differently. Certain people, super meticulous as far as workspace. Other people, looks a lot more like what my workspace looks like. But when it comes full circle through QC, you're getting the same consistent product coming out the other side of it. And with that, while I was there, yeah, like I want to say like 25 guns for a SWAT department were coming through, and yeah, just really high, consistent level of quality coming through there. That right there wraps up my experience down there in San Antonio with Sons of Liberty Gunworks. Incredibly grateful for the opportunity to kind of step behind the scenes and see where kind of Sons of Liberty Gunworks differentiates themselves from some other companies. Really cool to be able to take part in that too, and yeah, ultimately get a gun built out. Guns, plural, I guess. But as I end up getting more time with both that 11.5 inch as well as the 16-inch upper, bring you guys full reviews on those. And if you appreciate my content and want to support it, greatly appreciate it. Whether it's liking and sharing videos or going over to kitbadger.com, picking up KBAT target pads, stickers, patches, things like that, or supporting me directly through Patreon. Helps me go out and create more content for you. And if you support me through Patreon, you'll have active Discord, which you will have access to, and happy to answer all of your questions over there. Probably not down in the comments, but if you have questions for me, happy to answer them over there. And as always, thanks for joining us at kitbadger.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.